everything behind it. So we was talking about it from that perspective because before I saw the movie during a promotional interview, a lady, I don't know if she worked outlet or whatever she worked for, but she sat down with Ryan Coogler, and she brought up the fact that because there was a lot of like economic, like social economic messaging and stuff like that in it, and from the lady's point of view, she was like is this the first Marxist vampire movie? And so we were really replying to the film and replying to that interview that Ryan Coogler did with this lady. We're talking about, the symbolism behind vampires and capitalism and all this. It was crazy. Because I didn't really want to see the movie, but my boy was like, man, if we're going to talk about this interview, I think it's best that you watch the movie as well. So that way you get the bigger pictures. You can put it in perspective. So we went and watched the movie that morning, and then I went to his crib and did that interview, talk about the movie.
Nice.
Yeah. So you haven't seen it?
No.
You ain't missing nothing.
I had an offer to go, hey, would you like to come with me? And
You ain't missing nothing. I mean, like it's streaming now. It's been streaming for a minute. If you got, I think HBO Max or something.
I'm just dabbling back into my Lifetime movies, something that I've watched over the years.
Yeah.
Man, every time I watch a Lifetime movie now, I see why they call it feminist, because they make men look like simps.
Yeah, feminist.
Even black men. I'm not used to black men being simps. And I'm like, what's up? Like, what's up with that?
Yeah, my mom used to watch them Lifetime movies all the time when I was a kid. Oh, you rolling?
Yeah, I just started because y'all was talking.
Oh, just bantering? Oh, okay.
Call it off.
Okay. I figured that.
Yeah. So I know we're going to chop it up. Thank you for your time.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not too short for this mic right now, am I? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, yeah, I know we're going to touch base on a few topics. I know we're going to talk about, like, Israel and Palestine, or even a little bit of the theology with the sense of Christianity, or like the Abrahamic religions, Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, or even Jewish people, or Israel overall. I did want to throw in the Jay-Z versus Nas because the current casino deals that are going on.
Probably tell me more about that.
Yeah, and
I ain't been
kind
following.
of like, with what's going on with the left, what's going on with the right.
Mm-hmm.
I'm getting too much of the right in my pop-ups and my algorithms in terms of what's going on and how it's been bothering me for some time. Yeah, obviously we're going to talk about Candace Owens. And just what's going on overall.
Okay.
What would you like to start off with? What would you want to kick it off with?
I don't know, man. It's your, like I said, it's your world. I mean, seriously. Seriously. It don't matter to me. We can talk about, I don't know, man. I mean, like I say, you take it away.
I guess, we could start with, how about this? Have you seen the news lately? Like, there's peace, supposedly, in terms of Trump,
a great place to start.
Peace. Since that's the most recent thing, I think, as of 2 days now or 3 days, something in that spectrum.
Around there. I think they started
talking
swapping.
About.
I mean, every minute it's like an update. I think they started releasing some of the hostages as of yesterday, I believe.
Right.
Today is the 11th. But so you want to know, like, overall, what do I think about it?
Yes.
I mean, well, I gotta approach it. I have to approach it for what it is, and not like a politician. Because the fact of the matter is, I mean, we could. Did you refer to it? I can't remember, as a peace deal. Is that?
That's how they're pretty much interpreted it. And when you even, for example, like when people are reposting it, people are hopeful. Certain people, did you get to see Mossab Youssef?
On News Nation.
It's just his response. I don't know.
Oh yeah, I mean, he's right.
I would assume you have his.
Yeah,
same...
well, I am of the same opinion as Mossab Hassan Youssef, the son of Hamas,
right?
Son of one of the co-founders of the organization. He's right. I mean, he's right, and I mean, he's the only one who is approaching this, unlike a politician, right? He's coming from the inside as someone who grew up in the movement. I mean, he understands the mentality of that region more so than, you know, anybody else in the mainstream. Even if that's if you want to consider him, you know, mainstream, because, you know, a lot of mainstream pundits and whatnot won't talk to him. But no, there is, you know, you can call it a peace. It's just the latest, I guess, ceasefire in this ongoing war, right? Because, I mean, the reality is, and I'll just cut straight to the chase, there will never be peace as long as there's Islam. It's just that simple. You know, politician, of course, you know, can't speak on it in this way, right? Because it's not politically expedient, because, of course, you know, what people will read into that is, well, here's a person who is advocating for the extermination of all Muslims, which is something, you know, impractical. Not only is it impractical, but many would consider it immoral, and I would happen to concur with that. But no, I mean, once you understand what is motivating them, or what is the cause of this conflict, then you will realize that the problem is much bigger than just politics or land or this or that. You know, it's much deeper than that. You know, humanity. You know, we as inhabitants of this earth have been dealing with this scourge since the 7th century, and that's just the reality. So no, there's no peace, right? There's no peace until you have victory, right? And as of right now, I mean, no one has won, right? This is not a victory, right? You can't have peace until someone wins, and, you know, no one won. I mean, you could probably even argue. I mean, you consider how many Palestinians were released in this exchange. I think even to take it back to Mossab, he said that that what we're going to see in the next 10, 15 years is going to be another October 7th attack, but the next time is going to be far worse. And he's right. He's right. It's only going. It's now everyone is happy until it happens again, and it's going to happen again because Israel still exists. The West still exists. Islam has not taken over the world, and so it hasn't happened yet. And so, you know, that's just the way it is.
It's one of those things like you let your guard down and boom.
Yeah.
Kind of like October 7 itself. You let your guard down. You think everything is peace.
Yeah.
You think you're just going to walk outside or just breathe the fresh air, and then boom, just catches you off guard. Like, I guess to add another perspective, because this is under Donald Trump's term. As we know, October 7 was under Biden's term, right? Do you think, just in retrospect to Trump, just the way, you know, when you view world leaders or how they look at him and stuff, do you think that plays a part with the optimism that different people might have? Just because of Trump, not even, and I get what you're saying. I agree with you 100% with the Israel versus Palestine, because this even goes back to the Bible, you know, and throughout the centuries, like you said. But do you also think Trump, it's kind of one of those things, like people think like Trump plays no games, so there's hope in that perspective as opposed to when Biden was president during October 7, 2023?
Yeah, I think it does. But, you know, Trump is, you know, he'll be gone in a couple of years.
He's only one man, right?
Yeah, he's only one man, and he'll be gone, you know, sooner rather than later. So they're just biding their time, you know, and they'll wait, as you mentioned, you know, because that's what happens. You have these lulls. You have, at one point, you know, there's an era of you know, prosperity, security, and you know, you have like, say, if you look just looking at things from an economic point of view, and you have abundance, it always gives people the opportunity to, I guess, foster gripes towards those who are successful within that context, because success becomes more visible. And there are always going to be people who just simply aren't willing to do the work. And so once you have these times of great prosperity and economic boom, it's always followed by people wanting to show up, right, with their hands out, right? And as a result, when we have, you know, great times, right, great times creates weak men, right? And weak men come about, and it takes someone like Donald Trump to step in and set things straight. And so that's what'll happen. And the Islamic world will wait it out until the West becomes weak and complacent, like it has been comfortable,
Mm-hmm.
like it has been for several centuries, as a matter of fact. And we're probably getting to some of the history of it. Yeah, and I would say one thing about Donald Trump, and a lot of people say, well, Donald Trump he kind of fames Christianity because he knows that the so-called religious right is a huge part of his constituency, and so he kind of does this.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not going to speak on whether or not Donald Trump is a redeemed man, and will his soul be saved upon his departure from this earth. I can't say with certainty, but I do believe that he is a good man. He's an ethical man. For the most part, of course, he's flawed like any other person, but is he a saved man? I cannot say, but I do think he's ethical for the most part. And maybe that is one hindrance to him, or maybe people, if he were to speak in this way, people would simply roll their eyes. But if you really want to, I guess, I don't know. I mean, to shore up security for the West, you have to start framing the conflict in religious terms. And Trump doesn't do that. Contrary to what most people believe or what they remember, to take it back to a monumental historical figure, say like Ronald Reagan, right, and his confronting the Soviet Union.
Mm-hmm.
Ronald Reagan, he posed the issue in religious terms, right, and he called the Soviet Union out for their godlessness, for their atheism, and so on, and that really was a thorn in the side of the Soviet Union, as a matter of fact. And I think that is how Reagan was able to win the information war, win the propaganda war, or at least charge up and bring to life that sleeping giant that was behind the Iron Curtain, right? Because they felt like though they had a champion that was speaking for them on the outside. All right, he spoke about the conflict in religious terms, and Trump doesn't do that.
You're right. Yeah. Trump is kind of like the epitome of separation of church and the state.
So yeah.
And Ronald Reagan, being that his
Mm-hmm.
mother was Protestant, his father was Catholic,
Mm-hmm.
he had that Christian standard. And that's something that I always say about the United States, is that as the United States, we do not have a standard. We don't have the Christian standard.
Mhm.
We could say that the majority is Christian. Hey,
Mhm.
absolutely. That's totally fine.
Mhm.
But, when we're separation of church and state, you're allowed to be Muslim, Jewish, atheist, agnostic, et cetera, Buddhist.
Mhm.
I can go on and on and on.
Right.
And it goes into what you're saying, that Trump, he's kind of like that. Like it's a good thing. Like, when you mean well, like you want to have, we're a melting pot as the United States. You want to have these different religions, but going into what you said about Ronald Reagan, it's like he had that Christian standard, whether it's with the Soviet Union or just kind of like pretty much ending like the Cold War and everything like that. He had the Christian standard. When you do that, you set boundaries.
Yeah.
And I always tell people like something like a country like Saudi Arabia, for example. Saudi Arabia, just like the United States, is capitalist. Like there's people coming in Saudi Arabia doing business, doing, you could be a worker from overseas coming into Saudi Arabia and so forth. But, what do they have? They have, and yes, Islam is their standard.
Mm-hmm.
That's the boundary. In other words, America does, or not America, excuse me, the United States specifically. I don't want to say America because I know Latin America is very Christian.
Yeah.
The United
Christian.
States, to be specific, the United States, we don't really have that Christian standard.
Right. And that has a lot to do with, the fact that, this country is predominantly Protestant. And this is opinion, it may upset some people, but this is just the reality. And there's an historical precedent to this as well, because when you talk about Islam, to keep it in context, for the longest time, from the time that, the Arabs first emerged from the Arabian Peninsula in the mid-7th century, you had the, Western Christendom, or Catholic Christians to the west, the western flank, and right abutting the newly emerging Arab Muslim imperialists coming from the peninsula to the south, right? Is you had the Orthodox, right, Christians to the east, and when Martin Luther, right, Catholic clergyman, rebelled and created Protestantism as we know it today. That wasn't what 16th century, right? And so you're thinking from the 7th century all the way up until say like the fall of Constantinople in the 1450s. It had been the Eastern Europeans, the Greek-speaking Romans to the east, and you did have this collection of Latin-speaking Christians to the west. Of course, the Muslims called them, of course, the Franks, right? This composition of various Europeans and various Visigothic people that converted to Christianity. But Catholics and Orthodox Christians are battle hardened. They know, and it seems as though they understand more so than Protestants do, especially when it comes to the threat that is posed by Islam. And there's a historical precedence for this as well. Again, this is not me attempting to make a theological case for Catholicism over Protestantism or vice versa, but the historical record is the historical record. When Martin Luther first was becoming what he became, a lot of people, again, the father of Protestantism, the architect of the Reformation, but he was a man just like anyone else, right? Fallible, and for all of the great things you want to say about him, he got some things wrong, or perhaps he couldn't foresee the long-term consequences of a lot of things that he said. For example, a lot of people, again, may not know this or may just choose to ignore it, but Martin Luther had, of course, his famous book, The Jews and Their Lies. But set that aside for a second. He had a lot of what I would consider to be erroneous opinions when it came to Islam, because Martin Luther was of the opinion that the Muslims, because he was against the culture of crusading, as they called it, right? The crusade has been going on since the 11th century. But by the time, Martin Luther came about, the Muslims had been removed from Spain, and something we'll probably talk about as well. But the threat was still there because they were still trying to force their way into Europe. But Martin Luther was of the opinion that the Muslims should not be fought. He said that because Martin Luther believed that because the Christian world under Catholic domination, right, across Europe had become so corrupt in his opinion, in his mind, that he looked at the Muslims as like a curse, right? This was a curse brought upon them by God. And so in Martin Luther's mind, to fight back against the Muslims was to rebel against God. Now, how silly is that? Fighting the Muslims is rebelling against God because the Muslims they have descended upon you as a curse from God, right? And this was a huge part of Protestant propaganda at the time, because Protestants were of the belief, a lot of leading Protestants, Martin Luther, even John Calvin. John Calvin was of the opinion that there's a famous quote of John Calvin. I'm going to probably butcher the quote, but I'm going to paraphrase it because I don't remember it word for word. He called it like the dual horns of the Antichrist was Catholicism and Islam. Calvin believed that each threat, that Catholicism and Islam were both equally, dangerous, right, to the world. And so we saw for the first time across Christendom, again, this split as Muslims were becoming ever more consolidated, right? The Christian world was breaking apart, and you had the Protestants that were like, we're not fighting, we're not helping. Catholics were a little bit different. Catholics had a different culture, a different mindset, because Catholicism, of course, being the far more older strain of Christianity and Orthodox Christianity as well, it was from a different time, right? Because they were still, Catholicism came about during a time of empire, So they had a totally different sensibility, a more of a Christian warrior-like spirit that Protestants don't have.
From the Roman era.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And like I said, you people don't know or just, again, choose to ignore that Martin Luther encouraged his followers and, these new different kind of Christians. He told them, leave the Muslims alone. Only the Catholics will fight them. And that's true of Islam, and too, that was true of communism as well. I mean, to change the subject, because haven't gotten there. But for the longest time, the Catholic Church was the biggest thorn in the side to the spread of communism. Not the Church of England, but the Vatican.
So what would you say the overall relationship of Catholicism is to Islam? Is it akin? Does it enable Islam?
I don't think it enables Islam. I've seen too, a lot of information, or call them theories or whatever, because considering that the Catholic Church is so hierarchical, saying some people would consider it like sort of like almost like a quasi secret society in a way. It becomes the target of a lot of conspiratorial thinking, and so the Catholic Church sort of becomes sort of like Israel or international Jewry, right? You have a lot of theories out there about the nefarious and untoward dealings of the Catholic Church. But the reality is that there were times where certain concessions and deals and things of this nature were made between Catholics and Muslims. You saw that throughout the centuries. No different than than anything else. Since some people may would call it diplomacy or something to that effect. And so, yeah, but they've been dealing with each other for a long time. Sometimes they would war. Most of the time they were at war, but at other times there would be, certain concessions that they would make. Certain Christians throughout history, different types of Christians, they would join forces with the Muslims and fight the Christians on behalf of the Muslims, right? There was a term for them. They called these men janissaries. These were men who agreed to sort of live, right, live their lives as dhimmi, right? But they would be a part of the Islamic war machine. They signed up to be soldiers. Why? Again, they wouldn't denounce their faith, but they signed up to be soldiers because they felt like, well, for the sake of self-preservation, we better join up with the winning side, because they thought the Christian world was doomed, but they didn't want to give up their faith, but they just wanted to survive.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is forever. Like
Yeah.
the whole, the Abrahamic religions and the denominations in between, even just let alone within the Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, that's very interesting, because I also see historical timelines of like the 1920s, 1940s, where it seems like the Catholics would merge together with Muslim, or Islam, excuse me, in despite of the Jews, and I see that on a historical timeline. And
well, that's true. And like you said, when it comes to Christianity, to spite each other, of course, it was a huge part of why Islam was so successful. It's one of the most successful religions. I mean, Christianity, of course, is the only thing that rivals it. Christianity is still, last time I checked, statistically speaking, was the largest religion in the world. But I don't know if you've seen some of these predictive markers that state by 2040, 2050, Islam will be the largest religion in the world. And part of its success was due to the fact that there was a lot of doctrinal disputes, between, Christians. Of course, I think, what was it, the Council of Chalcedon? I can't remember which one it was. The council that split Christendom into East and West. Had a lot of infighting going on amongst Christians, right? Oftentimes, because a lot of people fail to remember, this is one of the things, or don't like to mention. It's one of the things, you hear a lot of, your pro black, ethno-Marxists, racial or black supremacists will always like to talk about, well, how can you black folks call yourselves Christians? It's the white man's religion and this and that. But of course, it's historically inaccurate. Anybody knows that. Of course, Christianity came out of the Middle East. It's the same, area. We talk about Judaism, Jerusalem, Bethlehem, and up into Asia, and Antioch and Anatolia, Asia Minor, such and so forth. Damascus, Syria, Iraq, Lebanon. These were all Christian countries,
right?
It's weird to imagine it now, right? Because when Alexander of Macedon, right, consolidated Greek power and moved into, Africa, of course, set up the library, Alexandria in Egypt. Egypt was a predominantly Christian country prior to Muslim invasion. A lot of people, again, fail to realize that, or they forget it, don't, for whatever reason. But, the Europeans, or the quote unquote white man, so to speak, they were kind of late to the party, but, Islam was able to capture about 3/4 of Christian land and pushed Christianity almost nearly to the brink of extinction. And you had a lot of the, pagan, like say peoples of Scandinavia, right? The Vikings, so on and so forth. They had partnerships with the Muslims as well, because, they both had a mutual interest in the slave trade. The Vikings would raid from the west and from the north, and they would capture European slaves, and they would sell them to Muslims. But the whole of northern Africa, all of that, Carthage, that's right, former Carthage, rival to the Romans, right? Algeria, Morocco, Mauritania, Algeria, that was all Christian land, and the Muslims just came up like a wave and just took it over.
Yes,
just took it over. And again, a lot of it had to do with infighting. Oftentimes the Eastern Romans, or what we call the Byzantium sometimes, they were kind of looking back going, hey guys, come out, we got a problem. And because of the internecine fighting between Latin-speaking Christians and Greek-speaking Christians, or what they call the Franks, oftentimes they wouldn't come. They would just ignore them. You hear a lot of this stuff today about, America first, or this, that. That's because the Christian world was fractured, and other times, again, they wouldn't help them. They wouldn't help them. Let the peoples of Constantinople or whatever, let them deal with their own problems. What does that have to do with Great Britain, or what does it have to do with France? What does it have to do with us?
Even now, with the allyship of America or the United States and Israel, they're like, oh, it's like you said, America first. Why should we be an ally of Israel? It goes into that same spectrum of what you're saying. Like, these are Americans. They're just like, oh, why should we? They don't understand what it is to be an ally. They don't understand trade and commerce. They don't understand none of that.
They don't know history, Lydia. It's like they don't. It may mean they talk the way they speak. You would think that they would at least know something, but it would seem to me that these people don't know the history. They don't know what they're talking about. They don't know the subject. They don't understand the conflict. Because, like I said, there was an historical precedent for this. There was one Christian. He's considered like a Christian humanist, right? Famous. I want to say, was he British or Scott? I can't remember, but he's famous. He's known in history as one of the great thinkers in the history, in human history, named Erasmus. And Erasmus has some criticisms at the time toward both Christians and Protestants, because they were so busy trying to discredit the other that they didn't realize, like I said before, that the greater threat was on the horizon, which was Islam. As a matter of fact, it wasn't on the horizon. By then they already knew, what Islam was all about. But if you go back, you see, in the beginning, right, when, of course, Emperor Constantine talks about the Nicene Council and whatnot, when the Roman Empire officially became Christian, And, the first Christian emperor of Rome, Constantine, of course, he set up the first capital of the Christian world, at Constantinople, right? And commissioned, I believe it was under Constantine the Great, the first Constantine, if memory serves me correctly. But if it wasn't him, at some point, of course, they constructed the great church of the Hagia Sophia, right? Great wisdom. And the Church of Hagia Sophia in Constantinople became the pinnacle of Christian civilization. It was the pinnacle of Christian civilization. And going all the way back to Muhammad, the Prophet Muhammad. What was his full name? Muhammad bin Abdullah, I forget his full name, but the Prophet Muhammad. In the beginning, before Islam grew into what it became, he would instruct his followers that whoever can take Constantinople, he will be Allah's favorite. He will get all the treasures and all that in the afterlife and whatever. And so from the time of Muhammad, Muslims for the longest time have been plotting on how to take Constantinople. And from the 7th century up until the 15th century, they tried to lay siege to it. They tried to lay claim to it, but they kept failing. But eventually they won eventually. And it's interesting because they won for two reasons. One reason was that they had an insider. They had a turncoat. They borrowed artillery or technology, or they were given artillery technology from a Christian. Actually, I forgot his name is I forget his name, but I think he was of German origin. But he was a tank architect, because what protected Constantinople was its architecture, its structure, its construction. It had big, walls, and the Muslims just couldn't get into the city. And this time around, of course, it wasn't until they called him sort of like the reincarnation of Muhammad II. Oftentimes he's referred to as Mehmet II. It was Mehmet II, of course, that finally took Constantinople in the 1450s. I think the exact year was 1453. But they brought with them, for the first time to Constantinople, they brought with them tanks. For the longest time, the Muslims didn't have that kind of weaponry. They didn't have that kind of technology. They fought with they almost used a form of guerrilla warfare, the Muslims, right? They would strike at night. They would, of course, they fought on horseback. They fought on camelback, and they were very, very good with bow and arrow. That was their kind of, and so they would strike. So Muslims would use swiftness, quickness, and speed, while the Romans used power, strength, right? Heavy armor and heavy artillery. And the Muslims fought in a different way, but they couldn't take Constantinople. So you had that, them, having tanks this go around, but also it was the weakness of Constantinople because they could not bring forth reinforcements because no one wanted to come. And the reason being, again, it goes back to what I was saying, is because you had this budding kind of secular sensibility growing within Europe, this was before the Enlightenment even, but still, that Constantinople's problems that was their problem. And I think I'm trying to remember, it was Constantine the 11th, right? So Constantinople was built by Constantine, and it fell under a Constantine as well. But there had been agreements for the West, the Pope and whatnot, to send reinforcements from Western Christendom. But for these theological schisms, they just never came. And so the day that Constantinople fell, the Sultan, he showed up with some historical estimates say that he showed up with about 700,000 men. And there was nothing but about 10,000 men left behind to protect the walls of Constantinople, because no other Christians wanted to come.
Wow. So these battles within the religions or within these different regions, this is never ending. This is just this is a eat food or be food, doggy dog world.
That's life.
And that's life. It's never gonna end.
That's life. Yeah, that's life.
Yeah, that's why I had to mention this, with the Israel and Palestine. Even if I were to give my answer myself, like, I don't have hope. Not that I don't want to sound like pessimistic, but I don't think, I think that Israel should keep their head up and their eyes open.
Oh, absolutely.
They should not let their guards down by any means. This is something that's going to go on forever. It's you see it in the Bible. As myself, I was born and raised Orthodox Christian. For me, it's more of an emphasis on the Old Testament as opposed to the New Testament. I'm one of those, and I always I'll leave stories or I'll talk on Instagram about there are Christians there's a split in Christianity, not just within the denominations, whether you might be Baptist or some will call it Southern Baptist or Protestant or Catholic or like Orthodox, if you will, Eastern Orthodox.
Right.
But you do have people even within these denominations that it's a split where people are into replacement theory. They're just kind of like, replacement theory, what is that? Replacement theory looks like a number of things. It can be, the main thing is, okay, who cares about what God told Moses on Mount Sinai within the 10 Commandments? Jesus came through, so the Old Covenant, which is within the Old Testament, that becomes null and void. That's what a lot of these Christians are doing. And these are Christians that are heavily against Israel. Right? In replacement theory, even though that's the main component, that's one of the most important things. It also looks like, because I was kind of going in on my stories the other day, leading into what we're doing right now at the moment. It also looks like, oh yeah, Jesus came through, so Christians can eat pork now, and they're just like, okay, forget about Leviticus from the Bible, or we could just get tattoos or whatever. Jesus said the ink is okay on your skin. Okay, like forget about Leviticus. Me, I'm just one of those like, and this is my conservatism. My conservatism is forget about politics or who's going to be the next president. My conservatism is more so in Orthodox Christianity, right? But people like to label me as a Republican when I never even called myself a Republican. Yeah, so it's just like, I just don't, I feel like these type of Christians, they're the biggest hypocrites. They're picking and choosing, and even just the word Israel within itself. They're just like, yeah, because of the new covenant, they're like, oh, Christians are the new Israel.
Right.
Not even so much focused around Jesus Christ. Like if you're a Christian, yes, you follow Jesus Christ. I respect that and I agree with that. But not even in the sense of understanding Jesus Christ himself practiced Judaism. So you just forget about Judaism, just forget about original Hebrew teachings, forget about the Old Testament. It's just, and this is where me and a lot of Christians, we disagree. We just can't go hand in hand on that.
Right.
And I'm not ashamed of it. They've, for the past year, 2024, this kind of started in 2023 because after October 7, even though I was confused and I had me personally trying to give grace to Palestine, I don't even know why I try to be, remember, because I told you I was neutral.
Yeah.
I can understand myself being neutral with Israel, let's say hypothetically, versus Saudi Arabia, because at least Saudi Arabia, that's the Mecca, and that's the lineage of Ishmael from the Bible. That's Isaac's brother. Like Isaac is the land of the Jews, and Ishmael is the land of the Arabs. I can understand Palestine. I'm being neutral with the red-headed stepchildren, and it's just like I'm like, you know what? I just, even the whole Palestine, anybody could be Palestinian. Yeah. So, you got the Negro-Stinians, you got all these, you got Slavic people putting on, and I get it, some of the Palestinians. It reminds me of the 2020 election with Joe Biden versus Trump. Everything they said Trump was, that's who Joe Biden is. Right. I feel like everything they say about Israel when they have the Khazarian theory that they're trying to say like Israel or like the Anatolians, like the Turks. Yeah. They're trying to say like, but a lot of Palestinians have Turkish blood in them. Yeah. Not to, during certain empires, certain eras, and stuff like that.
Because it used to be Turkish territory.
Yeah. So it's just people are just throwing that on. I mean, can you be Jewish born in Turkey, like just randomly? Sure. I mean, you could be born anywhere, but people are just throwing all these ideologies onto Israel and don't even. They're so colorist, just so focused on skin color. This is the big thing that constantly bothers me. They're so focused on skin color that they're even making it seem like a Jew is equal to an Anglo. And that's another thing. Like, this is where I parted ways with the right, in a sense. Like, I can't get behind all of that. It's very ignorant.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, it's a lot of, like you said, it's a lot of colorism and these kinds of things in there. Because, like you said, it's a lot more complicated, right? Than that. And, I think, just going back to, I don't necessarily have to go back to Solomon, but my point was when you brought up the fact that, yes, can there be someone, Jewish and, born in Turkey. It's funny for all of this talk about, the land that is Israel today. You know what I mean? It was, of course, the Christians controlled the Holy Land for a time, Jerusalem, until they lost it in the 8th century. I'm trying to remember what jihadi captured Jerusalem. I can't recall the name, but they took Jerusalem, Muslims, and they had it for a long time. And, the Christians, came back under, some of the great crusaders and these great heroes came in. I think it was a man named Bayamon, I'm pronouncing his name correctly, considered to be, of course, one of the great crusaders. Of course, they came back and took Jerusalem for a time. I think may have been like during the 11th century, if memory serves me correctly, but that didn't last long because, like most Christians, they allowed the Muslims to remain in Jerusalem, and they told them that they didn't have to convert, they didn't have to give up their faith. All the while, the Muslim authorities within their cloistered group was urging the adherents to Islam not to fall for the trappings of the filthy Roman. Don't fall for his ideas about openness and tolerance, a lot of these things. Of course, I mean, I'm being a bit anachronistic, but those are the only words that I could think to use. But again, like even back then, you can see this seedling of the Judeo-Christian ethic there, even with Christians even willing to put up with Muslims as neighbors. All the while, Muslims are being told to reject the ways of the Christian, to reject these Western ways. And yes, you can live amongst him, but you are never to sort of become him or to become like him. Because they still envision a day when they can subdue you, right? Allah commands them to do so. They're just waiting for a time when they can gain the upper hand. And I think I wanted to go back to something you said about Saudi Arabia, and to see it wasn't just simply them emerging from Arabia and spreading Islam, but what they were also doing is they were spreading Arab sensibilities. Because a lot of these people, even today, you don't know their background, they don't know their history, they don't know where they come from. Even the people who, to your point, just talking about the complexity of genealogy and these various things, a lot of people who call themselves Arabs, their ancestors weren't Arabs. A lot of them were
Jewish.
From either Jewish.
Yes.
A lot of them were from Phoenician areas.
Lebanon.
In Lebanon, these people. So when the Arabs came with their religion, not only did they spread Islam, but they spread Arabism. And oftentimes they would, especially when it came to the Europeans, and that's something we can get to because that's what actually helped to weaken what the Franks refer to as Moors, right? Is what helped weaken them because a lot of the caliphs were mixed race children because they were the children of women who belonged to a lot of these harems of the caliph. And so this is why you see so different. Sometimes you'll see a person who considers himself to be Arab. I mean, I don't know. You see, your first time here in Detroit, so we see them all the time.
It's Arab galore over
so
here.
You'll see Arabs. Some of them have green eyes, blue eyes. They look different.
Some of them look Italian.
They look. because they went about, because again, according to the dictates of the Quran, Muhammad states explicitly, of course, a Muslim, he's allowed up to 4 Muslim wives, but when it comes to his concubine, he can have as many sexual concubine in his harem as long as they're infidel women. And so, a lot of times, these, later generations of Arabs, when they would come in and they would replace Christianity with Islam, they would begin to grow sympathy for their European captors, because, many of them had white mothers and so on and so forth. And so this would kind of lessen the sting of the will and the want to wage war and to wage jihad. And what will happen is, and you still see this even to this very day, I think of what I'm about to say, as I think of the assassination of Anwar Sadat in the early 70s, because he violated the Khartoum resolution, because he was willing to have open talks with Israel, even though Anwar Sadat himself was a Hitlerian anti-Jewish radical, because he opened up negotiations with Israel, at least on the surface, for the sake of political pragmatism. He was assassinated by an Islamic radical. This has been happening in Islam since the beginning. Whenever a Muslim ruler would seek to somewhat moderate or try to make peace with Christians, oftentimes he would be assassinated. So when you go to, say, the Moorish occupation of Spain, once relations began to almost tailor off a little bit, where the Muslims and the Christians will becoming somewhat, kind of co-citizens in a way, this is when the reinforcements would come from the south, across the Strait of Gibraltar, where they came initially in the 8th century, and you had these more radical Muslims, or what they would refer to as pious Muslims. See, in Islam, people don't understand. The more pious you are, the more extreme, the more violent you are. They see violence as piety. People don't understand. Again, I'm not making this up. I'm not trying to cast aspersions on any Muslim, anything like that. But if they don't agree, then they just either ignore their Quran or their history, their legacy, or the teachings of Muhammad, or they just don't know it. Or maybe they're just lying to you. But they tell you, piety, the most pious thing a Muslim can do is to die in the service of Allah, which means is to die waging this war of jihad. And so you're not a good Muslim if you're not waging war, because you have to be in a constant state of war, because wherever there is a country that's not run by Muslims, I don't speak Arabic, and I don't want to even try to speak it, because I'll probably, mess it up, butcher it. But in English, of course, we are under America, Israel, Britain, France, Australia, countries in Eastern Europe, Latin America. We are under what is called in Islam a house of war. So you have two spaces. You have a house of Islam, and you have a house of war. And if it's not a Muslim country, then it is a house of war. And the constant goal is to wage that jihad. And sometimes that jihad is not violent arms. I can just come into your country, right? Use the political, let's say, correctness and the stupid do-good dupes on the left, these liberals. I can use your climate of tolerance that has grown into political correctness in order to subdue you from speaking out against me, right? People promote perversion and all these other things, and right, and of course, Muslims have this long-standing track record of convincing, right, other Muslims that non-Muslim women are far more promiscuous than their native women, and so they don't make families, they don't breed, they don't have babies. We'll come to their countries and we'll just outbreed them until we outnumber them, and there are more of us than there are them.
And that's in the land of war.
That's in the land of war.
So let's say, for example, Canada, United States, and England, that would be their mark for a land of war as we speak.
This is a house of war. and their constant war against us.
And it's funny because yesterday I went into the border of Canada. I went to Windsor yesterday. This is another thing that I do talk about with Americans. Like, you see, it's a trend to hate the Jews. The Jews did this. The Jews, they're at fault for capitalism. And then on the one side, they're communist. And then, they run this type of business, that type of business, and so forth. So, like I always say, and I always go off on social media, I see the white folks, you guys keep attacking the Jews, and you just, turn a blind cheek to the Muslims. But then even me yesterday, for my first time, obviously it's my first time in Detroit, and then I, get to have the opportunity to cross the border, go into Windsor yesterday. And, like I said, United States, England, or the UK and countries in Scandinavia, and I would even say Canada, of course, like, okay, it's a thing like, oh, the Muslims are taking over, man. And they talk about refugees and legal citizenship and things in that retrospect, with the Islamic group being a big part of that. Yeah. So I get into the border yesterday in Canada, and it's like, oh, y'all got Muslims working on the team in order for me to cross the border. So it's like, how you going to be mad that Muslims is taking over, and you in order for American citizen like myself or any other American for that matter, it could be a white American, black American, who cares? Right. In order for us to get to the other side, you got Islam, you got like the Muslims. Man, I seen a Muslim there working. Then when I crossed into Windsor, it was Islam galore. Like, I've never seen over here and to the other side. Like, I've never seen that many Muslims and or Arabs, or some Turks. I know the Turks, they're not Arab, but I'll just put that in the Muslim category. I've never seen so many in my life, and I'm not mad because they're very nice to me. It's not my battle in that sense.
But they, like you said, you mentioned like the Turks, of course, Turks aren't Arabs, but just going back centuries, people were different, but there was a kind of general sensibility in the world at the time. Before they were the Turks that we know today, a Turkish people. Back then, the more common word was Turkic, not Turkish.
They were more white. Yeah, they're white basically. Yeah.
You got Turkic people, but originally, historically speaking, the Turks sort of began their sojourn, if you will, inside the house of Islam as slaves to the Arabs. That's how it began. They started off as slaves because the Turks or the Turkic people, they were a collective of nomadic tribes. It's the same thing with Arabs, and it was Islam and the Prophet Muhammad who unified the tribes and put down your petty squabbles, right? Become one. The enemy is not each other. The enemy are those people out there, right?
And who are those people out there?
All those who are outside of the house of Islam. Anyone, because in order to, of course, you've heard the term, people talk about the Shahada, right? They say, this is how you, and this was part of the process, throughout the centuries. When Muslims will wage war on a people, right? In order to when you surrender, in order to spare your life, maybe. Even if you had your life spared, you probably went on to have a horrible life, depending on who you were. If you're a woman, then boy, I tell you, if you were a man, or even if you were a young boy, this is another. And I'm gonna get back to the thing I was talking about the Turks, but this is another not often mentioned secret, about Islam was the rampant pedophilia and homosexuality, because it was known. Part of the process was Islam. If you fought a battle, you won a war, you took a city, you took the people captive. You had to offer up what was called a blood sacrifice, and oftentimes the sultan or the caliph or whatever the case was, he would ask a family to hand over one of their sons, because they would have the sons were a part of these harems, and they would subject these young boys to unnatural acts. The man who who took Constantinople, the great Muhammad II, was a rampant homosexual. He liked boys just as much as he liked girls, if not more so. And Muhammad II, he was quite the character. But to go back to the Turks again, they were a nomadic clan or a clan of nomads,
Just moving around.
different different people around that area. And what Islam did, and I'm gonna borrow an opinion, borrow sentiment from Raymond Ibrahim, one of the world's leading researchers and scholars on the history of Islam. And the way he phrases it is that he says that what Islam did is it gave theological legitimacy to Arab sensibilities. And the same can be said of the Turkic people. The same can be said of the Mongols, because of course the Mongols, the Khans, Genghis Khan was not a Muslim, but his later descendants would convert to Islam. And pretty sure most of us are at least mildly familiar with the ongoing wars between the Mongols and the Russians, because the Mongols nearly took over Russia. Again, the whole history of the world, what I'm saying, it could have been very, very, very different. But the Arabs came again. It was like, okay, put your clannish feuding away, and we are all going to become part of the same clan. Essentially, we're all a part of the same family, right? You heard this term, the Ummah. It's what they call, Islam. The whole of the Islamic world can be encapsulated or described in one word. They call it the Ummah. Now, the etymological origin of the word Ummah is mother. So they all descend from one mother or one source. They don't all come from one mother, but that's the way they see it, right? But figuratively speaking, they're all a part of the same family, right? And all you have to do is embrace Islam. Now, to be fair, throughout their warring efforts, beginning in the 7th century, they had a lot of issues with ethnic squabbles as well, because the Arabs felt as though they were superior even to those who became part of the quote-unquote family when they recited the Shahada, right? The Shahada is, of course, that, what is this Shahada? It is that there is no other God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger, or Muhammad is his prophet. So you had to recite the Shahada or you would lose your head, okay? And so when they went into, for example, Northern Africa, right? You hear the term the Berbers, right?
Yes.
Right? They converted a lot of the Berbers. These were North Africans,
The Moroccans from that region, yeah.
But they weren't Arab.
No.
And so the Arabs looked down upon other Muslims who were not Arabs, even African Muslims, right? You could say, oh, my brother, alhamdulillah and all that stuff, right? If you're a black person, whether you be in Africa, you in America, you black, you convert to Islam, yeah, they'll look at you like, oh, okay, my brother, your fellow Muslim,
yeah,
right?
But they're not ethnic. But they're not ethnically the same,
right? But try to marry one of their daughters.
Yeah, that's different.
Not gonna happen.
No.
Right? You're Muslim, but you're not one of us. You're not Arab.
Exactly.
You see, and so the Arabs that's what they would do. They would conquer, subjugate people, and then sometimes their influence will wane, and that's what happened with the example of the Turks. You had one, of course, the infamous tribe of Turks that rose up, but they started out as slaves, right? The infamous Seljuks. And the Seljuks became the most powerful clan of Turks. And, the Seljuks became, eventually it grew into the Ottoman Empire after Osman Ghazi. Ghazi, the word Arabic, and
wow.
the word Gaza or Ghazi, it means warrior. Sword or warrior. Raging a spiritual battle. Now, when we say the Gaza or the Gaza Strip, it might not be exactly fair to relate it to that, but phonetically, you hear there's a connotation to the word Gaza. It means battle. It means war, to raid, or someone who is a warrior. Again, he was the patriarch of the Osman dynasty, which created the Ottoman Empire. Osman Ghazi. It means warrior. So it's always a constant state of war. And so I just want to say something before you chime back in, time is, and I know you said a lot about replacement theory and these kinds of things, and I'm not one, I'm not the theological expert here. I have, read the Bible and tried to understand a lot of things that, especially when it comes to a lot of an important book in the Bible. Every book in the Bible is important, but the book that people point to the most is, of course, the book of Romans. They talk about how Paul, the things that Paul talked about, and how he felt sorrow and anguish for the Jews. He being Jewish himself, and he was talking about, how they don't, they've been blinded or something. I forgot how it's worded, but I think it's something that you probably can chime in on this. But it's sort of like when of course Moses goes to Pharaoh. And remember, the Bible says that, well, Pharaoh was going to let the Jews go, but God hardened his heart so that he wouldn't. I said, well, why would God send Moses in to ask Pharaoh to release his people, but then God would harden the Pharaoh's heart? And then we know how the plagues and things of that nature descended upon Egypt. Well, a lot of, the explanation that I hear from most biblical apologists is that God wanted to show the Egyptians, or show the world, show the Israelites who he was, right? This is what has to happen, right? So that you all can revert back to me, right? Don't forget who God is. Don't forget who I am. And I heard somebody say recently, something of great importance. We're talking about, sort of similarly speaking, how the Jews are kind of blinded to the truth of who Jesus was. Again, I don't want to get too theological. At least I'll listen to you, explain that to me. But like I said, I hear a lot of people talk about the relationship between God and his chosen people, the Jews, is meant to enlighten the world on God's nature, to show you the characteristics and the aspects of God, his fidelity, his patience, his love, his commitment, so on and so forth, right? His sense of justice, his sense of righteousness. So as far as, like you say, the whole, replacement thing and Christians, I think a lot of Christians suffer from, and I'll just go here, and this is going to make a lot of people upset, but I don't care. I think a lot of Christians suffer from what I call spiritual neurosis. It's like this insecurity where they almost, it's funny too, because they always talk, Christianity, one of the key, pillars or virtues of Christianity is, humility, right? And that's the beginning of, humility and wisdom begins with fear of God and all this stuff, right? But I don't get that sense from a lot of Israel hating Christians. I don't get this sense of humility. And what I mean is this obsession. When you talk about replacement theory, to me, there's this constant obsession to remind people, even when that's not the topic of discussion, that the Christians have replaced the Jews, or that support for Israel is not going to save your soul, when that may not even be the topic of conversation, but they want to make it a point to remind you and anyone else who is listening, because as a Christian, how can I make myself visible before God? Because why are we still hearkening on this idea of a chosen people when I'm here now? To me, it just seems like a lot of middle child envy. It's like the oldest sibling will always be your parents' favorite, right? Your oldest sibling will always be the apple of your parents' eye. And so here you come along as the second in line. And especially now you got Islam come behind you. So you really got that middle child syndrome now.
Right.
And so it's like a look at me, right? Daddy, I'm over here. I'm important too. Don't worry about them. Look at me. But if you're so sure, if you're so convinced in what you believe, then let it be what it's going to be.
Right.
You don't have to project and proclaim your salvation as a Christian. Just let it be. I was saying something recently, and I was talking about set aside the theological differences between Christians and Jews, because there are a few, one major one in particular, obviously. But I said that the reality is that, of course, free will is a gift from God. And so you're going to have to deal with people in this life who do not agree with you. Jews are going to be Jews, Muslims are going to be Muslims, so on and so forth. That's just the way it is, okay? But when it comes to the secular law, Christians and Jews, there is a better prospect for future peaceful coexistence than with an ascending Islam and everyone else. Christians and Jews can get along, although there have been, of course, times throughout the centuries where they haven't gotten
They
along.
have a split.
And we'll get to that. But you must be able to sit your theological differences aside for the sake of the secular law, where we have politics and accountable government and all these sorts of things, if you're going to have a community. Now, if you want to make your community religiously exclusive, then that's a totally different conversation entirely. But you're still going to have to contend with your neighbors, right? Those who are outside your borders. So every moment you spend criticizing Israel or criticizing Jews is a moment that you are not spending doing something else. And that's my major issue. You can have as many problems with Israel as you want to. You can have as many problems with Jews as you want to. But the more and more you criticize Israel, the more and more you're not talking about Iran. The more and more you're not talking about Yemen and what's going on in Sudan and what's going on in Nigeria and what's going on in Syria and so on and so forth. You're not talking about that. Now, why do you want to pick on the only representative government, the only representative democracy, the only secular country? When I say secular, a lot of people especially a lot of ideological and political Christians don't even know what I mean when I use the term secular, because it comes with such a negative connotation. But it's not, because the culture of secularism in the West, it came out of the Judeo-Christian ethic, right? This notion of secularism, because it was Judaism and Christianity that sort of restored the dignity of man, right? And so those two things go hand in hand, right? Faith and reason, spirituality and the secular law. Kind of Muslims understand this, but they understand it in a different way, and they understand it in a way that is dangerous, and that puts a Christendom at risk. And so that's what's so maddening to me. Right? Time is finite, Lydia. You only have so many hours in the day. What you gonna spend your time doing? Obsessing over Israel?
Yeah, and that's what the Christians, the Jews that particularly follow Judaism, they're keeping their consistency. That's one thing that I have to say. They're keeping their consistency, whether it goes back to Mount Sinai and the Ten Commandments. They're just thorough, very consistent. Whereas with Christians, you have different denominations now. So even if it's the Christian versus the Catholic, they're not even on one accord within the umbrella of Christianity itself. Will Jewish people end up, let's say in the long haul in the future, will they believe in Jesus Christ? Ultimately, that's something that you just leave in God's hands. That's what with Christians, like, you claim to be a Christian, but I don't think they're really faithful. The Christians, I'm not going to say all Christians. I'd be wrong to say that, but they're just not, living up to their word. I think they hate on the Jews because that's where religion crosses into capitalism a lot of the time, where, okay, you have the Jews, okay, the ones that particularly follow Judaism, they follow what they're supposed to do. They keep up with the Torah. And then in the capitalist world, it's just, hey, each one teach one. Their families, within their family, they look out for one another and everything like that. And the Christians, they just, because with Christian, who are the Christians? That's like a worldwide. You could be black, white, and then people will add their own remix of whatever ethnicity or whatever culture it is. They'll just add that within Christianity, whereas the Jews are the Jews. Then you have the Muslims in the backgrounds, like, they'll try to join forces with the Christians to attack the Jews, and it's worked numerous times throughout different times in different eras, whereas Muslims will even come out their mouth and say, oh yeah, we do believe in Jesus. We do, we've come across Jesus, we've known him, or, whatever the case may be, and Christians will fall for it. And It's just all like my enemy's enemy is my friend kind of a basis.
Yeah.
And that's what the Christians and the Muslims, they join together out of a trauma bond because they both hate the Jews.
Well, I hate to cut you off. I'm sorry, but I got to say this while you mention it, because, you know, I hear so much talk, you know, this fool Tucker Carlson gets up there at Charlie Kirk's memorial and, you know, gaslights the entire audience by, you know, reminding everyone, of course, that the Jews, you know, committed the most unforgivable act, which is the killing of a god, right? They committed the great deicide. Even though, of course, you know, biblically speaking, that's inaccurate, but, you know, don't let biblical truth get in the way of Tucker Carlson's argument. But for all of this talk, you know, about, you know, Jews rejecting the Messiah, even though, you know, the earliest Christians were, you know, Jewish converts, set that aside. You know, and that's why I say spiritual neurosis, right? A lot of Christians, they feign humility. They're not humble at all, because the fact that by their own admission, according to their own doctrine, they one day will have to bow at the feet of a Jew, right? They admit this, but yet they castigate the lot. They reject the whole of them. They hate all Jews except that one. Perhaps the fact that they have to humble themselves before that one Jew is the source of this maddening, illogical hatred, this projection onto all other Jews, because they hate the fact that they're going to have to bow to one in particular someday. Maybe that's it. But for all of this talk about the Jews rejecting their God, rejecting Christ, and the Muslims rejecting too. I mean, you know, if you know, read the Quran and you read what they speak, I mean, this idea of a Trinity to a Muslim is one of the most offensive things according to the Quran and its, you know, its doctrine, Quranic doctrine. That's what they refer to Christians. They refer to them, of course, you know, we are dhimmi, or people of the book, but they also refer to Christians as polytheists, because they suggest that we believe in multiple gods because we reject the Trinity. The very idea that God became a man, God became a man and was put on a cross. It's so offensive to a Muslim. The fact that you are equating a man or another being of the entity with Allah, with the one true God, there's nothing more offensive to a Muslim almost.
Let alone Jesus being Jewish.
Right. And, you know.
They can't, that just...
Right. And even though, of course, you know, in the Quran, of course, they claim that Abraham was Muslim. But even in the Bible, it talks about how, you know, Ishmael, I forgot how it's worded exactly, but the Bible talks about Ishmael being like a monkey, being like a beast. He's going to be a nuisance to his people, a nuisance to the world, a nuisance to his brothers, or something like that in the Bible. It talks about, kind of prophesied the behavior of the Ishmaelites. Muslims reject this idea of a Trinity. They reject this idea that Christ died on the cross. They reject this idea of a triune God, because no God or person or whatever the case can be equal to Allah. And so, you know, Muslims, if you learn the history, the things that they would do to crosses, when they would come in and they would conquer churches, they would burn them down. They would parade the crucifix through the towns or the cities that they conquered. They would hurl obscenities and, beat their drums, and they would, hurl filth and urine and feces upon crosses, and they would do all sorts of things because the idea, again, that a God could be killed, that God died on the cross for your sins, is just objectionable to them. While they simultaneously preach this idea, it's funny, the Jews, we don't know how, somehow, some way they're always doing something, right? But it's funny because, in Christianity, we say, well, God sacrificed the one who was innocent, right, for us. And so therefore, the penance, the debt essentially has been paid, right? Islam is you atone for your own sins by shedding your own blood, because when you die in the service of Allah, then that is the most pious thing a person can do, is to wage war. So essentially, you must die for yourself. So no matter how sinful you are as a person, you may not be the most perfect Muslim, all the dietary restrictions and praying 5 times a day and doing all the things that Muslims aren't supposed to do. I don't know. But you may not be the perfect Muslim, but all of your transgressions against Allah would be forgiven if you become a martyr. Because martyrdom, according to Islam, is the central principle. It's the central theme of the whole thing. It's martyrdom. Christianity is not like that, right? Judaism is not like that, right? What do you learn from the Old Testament? What does the Bible say? Choose life. Choose life. Muslims, they choose death.
Death. Mm-hmm.
They even say, of course, famous quote of, I forgot who said it, but of course, we love death more than you love life. That's why you'll never defeat us, they say. Say, you will never defeat us because we love death more than you love life. They breed children to die. They breed children to be suicide bombers. You've seen the footage of,
they have nothing to lose.
Yeah, these
bombs.
women putting these suicide bombs in their children, kissing them goodbye, and if you have had a chance to read Douglas Murray's book, Democracies and Death Cults, and the footage that he's seen and the voicemails and the things that he heard, these recordings of these. And again, these weren't just Hamas fighters, right? These were so-called Gazan citizens, Palestinian citizens. They weren't just, right? Just the whole of the whole thing. It permeates the whole of that little tiny microscopic society. But you gotta understand, to fight, to kill a Jew, to kill an infidel, I don't think people understand the savagery and the barbarism that exists within that culture. Like you said, Mossab talks about it, not enough people are listening to him. But again, they just don't understand it. But, somehow, you want to blame a Jew. And I know why they do it, Lydia. It's this, because I think inherently, most people understand that cowardice is no virtue. So Christians would much rather, because their liberal sensibilities have betrayed them. And I'm talking about classical liberalism, the kind of liberalism that came out of the Enlightenment, right? This idea that we are inherently reasonable, right? There's a lot of things that, you see the counter to the Enlightenment, the pushback against the Enlightenment was, of course, the Romantics, right? People like Jean-Jacques Rousseau and others talked about, well, you can't put all this emphasis on reason because it is the emotion. The emotion is what makes us human, right? It's the old dichotomy between the philosopher and the artist, right? You can't rationalize your way to some truth. It doesn't work that way, right? But for the most part, that's kind of like the idea that kind of gained primacy in the wake of the Enlightenment. And so most of us looking at this, we're saying to ourselves that you're telling me these things about the Islamic world, and it doesn't mesh well with my liberal sensibilities because people don't act like that, right? A rational person doesn't act like that. So something must be wrong. Something is disturbing the wiring somewhere in there, right? Whether you want to say, well, this, international Jewry or whoever you want to blame. But the fact of the matter is that people would much rather do what requires the least of them.
Yeah, that's human nature.
Yes. Criticizing Jews, criticizing Israel requires the least of me. I won't criticize Islam. I won't offend the prophet because I know that I could die. What I'm saying to you right now could get me killed, and I live in a backyard full of Muslims.
I see that now that I've visited this city, because I've never seen so many. And I'm not saying it in a bad way, but I've never seen so many Muslims in my life.
Yeah, and that's just it. It's just blatant cowardice, and this is why I say too. This is why Christians and Christians must remain the majority for the sake of the Muslims that I know in my life, because I know some, and I'm
It's no problem. Just know you probably got some that you cool with.
At the risk of sounding cliche, there's some Muslims that that I genuinely care about. One of my close homeboys that I play ball with, is Muslim. His name is Musa. Musa was the namesake of the guy who actually invaded Spain and took it over. Well, first he sent one of the Berber converts, the infamous Tariq. Tariq was the one who came in and began to wreak havoc on Hispaniola, or what they call El Andalus. Right, it's an Arabic corruption of the word vandal. Tariq, and then Musa sent Tariq, and then Musa came in or whatever, and there's a whole history behind that. And they two of them. But I had a friend named Musa. I haven't seen him in a while. But again, I don't want to start naming all the Muslims that I know. We'll put people out there, but they're wonderful people, and for the sake of them, for their sake, I want them to continue to live in a Christian country for their sake.
To have that freedom for themselves, amongst their families.
Amongst their families and for themselves, right? This is why society, but you have to keep that element to a minority for the sake of the protection of the very Muslims that may or may not like you. But that's just what you have to deal with, if... all the stuff, Thomas Jefferson, all the stuff that's part and parcel of the liberal tradition, which again came out of our Judeo-Christian sensibilities. If you believe it, if you want it to be so, and you want it to carry on, and you want it to continue, you cannot allow Sharia, you cannot allow that to become the norm, the main, because your society is gone. And the Muslim people that you love and care about, they're going to become slaves just like you. Especially if you're a woman, especially if you're a woman. So, we have to make sure that we maintain Christian hegemony in all Christian majority society.
And the irony that a lot of people don't know is that the Jews and the Arabs are related. A lot of people, just do not know that. Whether it goes to Isaac and Ishmael,
right,
or even Jacob and Esau. It just, when you read these biblical stories, going to Genesis and Obadiah, and like I say, I still have more to learn with the Bible, but I'm just more well-versed with the Old Testament compared to the New Testament. That's just me personally. But even going to Isaac and Ishmael, when you have the two twin brothers, Jacob and Esau, even Jacob, his name became Israel. See, that's the conversion. Not Israel is not the land, and it becomes a whole different... Now it turns into the Gentiles, but no, Jacob, he was out of him and his twin brother, he was the chosen one, Jacob. Yeah. And his brother Esau ended up reproducing and having children with Ishmael's daughter, who Esau is basically the father of the Edomites, which would be the current day Jordanians. Okay. You remix it, you could say it's the Palestinians. Okay. So when you look into Genesis and Obadiah and stuff like that, the Palestinians today, who are the spinoff of the Jordanians and or Turks or people in that surrounding area, they're just like in the Bible at that time. And we're talking 3,000 to 4,000 years ago, even before Jesus Christ came, they were here to destroy Israel. Yeah. But whenever you see a Jew and an Arab that actually get along with one another, they say, hey cousin. If I don't know if you ever seen that, I see a lot of Muslims here, or Arabs and some non-Arab Muslims. I've seen some Jews when I got off the airplane, but I haven't really seen. There might be a lot of Jews, but maybe they're in the outer towns.
Yeah, we got a small little community in Jews in the city called Southfield. You'll see them out there, Hasidic Jews. But we don't have many. But we got a small little Muslim community. So many Muslims. Community.
But yeah, the Jews and the Muslims, they are related. Even when people talk about the nose shape, they say that the Jews only have it, but the Muslims, the Arabs in particular, Arabs like the Saudi Arabians, the people from Iraq and stuff, or even some of the Sudanese, they got that nose too. They both, and I'm not making fun of it, but I just know that they're definitely related. It even goes into the whole Sarah was the mother of Isaac, and Hagar, she'd be from current day Egypt. She was the mother of Ishmael. So she was darker than Sarah. Even like I said, like if you look at a Jew and an Arab, you can see, but people are so stuck on skin color that they can't see that they have a lot of the same facial features. It's in the eyes, it's in the nose, and stuff like that. Yeah. And I know you're talking about Christianity hegemony, which again, that goes back to what I said in the beginning of this conversation. That goes back to the standard. That goes back to the boundary. And then, like, you know, we talk about the Spanish Inquisition, which is a whole different era. I always tell people don't know that a lot of Latinos are mixed with Jewish and or Arab. Because if you're telling me that the Muslims or the Moors, I guess a lot of Black Americans, they say that the Moors were Black. You know, some of them, it could be a little percentage.
Some of them were, but again,
not the majority.
Yeah, it was
North
a
African
mix.
and Middle Eastern.
Yeah, North Africans and Middle Easterners.
Yes.
It was a mixture. The word Moor, and it's funny, like you say.
That's Moroccans.
Yeah, that's
the
where
Berbers.
The Berbers is where the term comes from. It was a term that, again, it was kind of like a corruption of Morocco and Mauritania. This is what the peoples of Al-Andalus, or Spain, they referred to the peoples of North Africa as Moors, as just one large collective. But like you said, you had, you know, Arabs and Berbers and African. I mean, they were all a part of, you know, what they call so-called Moors. You know, they were all Muslim. You know, and many of them, especially when it came to the Berbers, and this goes back to something I said a while ago, that when it just came to, you know, warring, because again, it's funny, the God of the Jews, it's civilized. It's civilized the world in a way. Especially when you're talking about outside the boundaries of the kind of Hellenic political and cultural context, because I always say that Western civilization it's triune, it's tripart, like this mic I'm talking into now. It stands on three legs. You have we get our political system, the philosophy of reason, our politics comes from Greece, right? Our morals, our spiritual system, it comes from Jerusalem, the Jews, and then later with Christianity that was built upon the foundation of the Jews. And then, right, you have Rome that kind of crystallized it all and kind of took these precepts out and into the world in a way in which that we had never seen before. And so Western civilization is defined in three parts: by Athens, Jerusalem, and Rome. You know, and
I can see that.
You know, and that's what I always tell people. People don't get it, and they don't realize. And I forgot what you had said that sparked me to want to mention that. But
maybe the Roman Empire, or going into the Iberian Peninsula.
Yeah, because we were
Spain and Portugal.
Yeah, Spain and Portugal. Yeah, because they had to fight the Muslims off. Because they wanted to kill the infidels. But it wasn't. I don't think I'm trying to remember the year. I can't remember the year France was founded. But before it was called France, it was called Francia, something like that. And
and France is the Roman Empire too.
Yeah. It was the Holy Roman Empire, right? Because there's this area of mountains that separate Spain and France called the Pyrenees, right? And the Muslims for centuries couldn't get past the north of Spain into France, because every time they would try, France would push them back into Spain. And they kept fighting and fighting for so long. And the Western Christendom was so, as I've been mentioning, was so split up, so broken up. They had to erect a protector for Christianity to the West, and then that's when the Pope at the time, I don't remember what Pope it was, but in 800 A.D., of course, he anointed the first Holy Roman Emperor, right? Charles the first of Charlemagne. I don't know if this idiot Charlemagne or whatever he calls himself on but I don't even know if he knows I don't know if he knows who the real Charlemagne is or what he did.
I'm not from. I've heard, yes, but I guess enlighten me.
Yeah. Charlemagne, he was the first Holy Roman Emperor.
Wow.
And he the Pope at the time, they said, man, we have to consolidate Catholicism here in the West, or else we're going to fall to these savages again. Because when the Moors first emerged on the scene, like I said, the peoples to the east of Rome, the Eastern Romans, they already knew what time it was. But by the time they got to the West, a lot of people were like, they didn't know, they had no idea who these people were. And you gotta people. I'm really kind of just sanitizing the history of how savage the Muslim people. Listen, there's no way that I could possibly downplay the things that they did, the things that they would do. They were so bloodthirsty, so vicious. And part of it was, that was a part of their psych warfare, because of course they wanted to instill fear and panic in the enemy. And a lot of Christians were afraid of them. We were afraid of them because of how they behaved. Because, Christians are so refined, even though, Eastern Rome was a little bit more refined than Frankish Rome or Western Rome. But yet and still, Christians could not understand, how in the world are you saying you're a prophet? This man is supposed to be a man of God, and he's encouraging you. He's saying, go wage war, and you will get the spoils of that war. You have sex with, and they want Muslims. They love white women. I'm sorry, they call Umar.
No, they're not the only ones, but
right. Call Umar. They love Arab, the Muslims. They were obsessed with the white women of Rome, the blonde hair, red hair, white skin, but they love them. They even fashion. Of course, you die, become a martyr. Of course, when you go to heaven, there are 72 virgins waiting for you, right? According to Islamic tradition or whatever, their doctrine, they refer to them, of course, as the Huri. Maybe that's where we get the word whore from. I'm not sure. But again, the Mohammedans were the random caliphs. There's so many people in the history of this ongoing war, because Christians and Muslims have been warring for 15 centuries. This has been going on for 15 centuries. It didn't just start, with the Ottomans and the fall of the Ottoman Empire, and then the creation of Israel after the British Mandate. Muslims and Christians have been warring for over 14 centuries. This has been going on. And one of the inducements, the enticements to war, was the promise that you could have sex with white women. I know I'm kind of trivializing.
So that was the jackpot?
Yeah. White slaves, particularly white slave women. And the Houris, as described by the Prophet Muhammad, are fair-skinned, round-eyed, big-bosomy women. White women became like the object of their obsession. Now, it could just be because they just weren't familiar with contrast from what they're used to. Yeah, oh man, I've never seen these kind of women before. But those were the women that they were obsessed with. You mean to tell me, all I got to do, especially when they encountered the pagans of Africa? Wait a minute, you tell me there's a God out there that's going to tell me that I can have the spoils of war, and guess what? If I win, I win. And if I lose, I win. Because if I win, I get to enjoy it in this life. If I die, I can have all the sex I want to have in the afterlife. Christians, you got to understand, they're thinking, your God told you this? Your prophet told you this. They couldn't believe it. And so the people who were like, and mind you, the Muslims are coming in, and it's like, hey, you either convert or die. It's like, okay, well, I think I'm gonna go with you, Mr. Muslim man, and you telling me that I can do all it. It played in well with their sensibilities, because most people were warlike people anyway. And so now you're going to divinate it. Oh shoot, if that's even a word. Oh shoot, I'm in. So here we go. I get to have sex. So that's where the barbarian they signed up for it.
Wow.
Christians were like, because Christianity was built upon restraint. You restrain your sexual appetite. Islam encouraged you to indulge your sexual appetite, to do things to excess. So you see this kind of contrast and sensibilities. And so the Christians they couldn't wrap their mind around that. So again, to go back to Charlemagne, he was I think he was the great grandson or the grandson of another hero in Christendom named Charles the Battler, and Charlemagne was the grandson of Charles the Battler, and he was the first protector of the Holy Roman Empire as emperor, and he was the one who kept Charlemagne. He prevented the Muslims from taking over the whole of Europe. He stopped them right at the Pyrenees Islands, and they remained relegated to Spain. And of course, their capital was Granada. And of course, it wasn't until the marriage between Ferdinand and Isabella that Ferdinand and Isabella were like, all right, it's time, y'all gotta go. So they finally kicked the Muslims out of Granada.
And that was in 1492, right?
Yep, 1492.
The Emirates of Granada, right?
Yep.
So here's the thing with me, speaking into that. Okay, we speak about Christianity, a Christianity standard, right, or hegemony that could go hand in hand. So what we see often today, we live in the era of technology, right? You see people just keep, in terms of Europe, just white Europe, so to speak. Oh my God, Islam is taking over. Islam is taking over, or for Canada and even here, if we don't watch out in the United States, we're going to be the next stomping ground for the Islamic takeover. So within that, I often hear people say, because we know that Africa, we know Asia, it's under attack. Like Christianity is under attack in Africa and Asia for many, many years. We know that, what's left of it. But we keep hearing if Europe gets under attack for Christianity, then we're under big troubles. So I've been sharing Instagram stories leading up to this podcast today. I was talking about Latin America in particular. So which this will go to the fall of the Emirates of Granada and the takeover of the Spanish Inquisition in the year of 1492, which is a very interesting and historical year. I was letting people know in my Instagram stories, and they could probably think I'm delusional, but I was doing that leading on the way here, or a couple of days ago, rather. I was saying that, it's one thing for, we already know Christianity is under attack in Africa, Asia, and Europe. But I say, me personally, I say that if Christianity were to ever be under attack in Latin America, from Mexico all the way down to Argentina, Chile, and Uruguay, and going out even to the Caribbeans, Dominican Republic, Cuba, and Puerto Rico. Yeah. If Christianity is under attack in those countries, I would say the world is over, because we're going into the spectrum of the standard of Christianity and the hegemony of Christianity overall. When there was the rule of Spain in the Iberian Peninsula, which would be Spain and Portugal, the whole thing was about it is the Muslims ruled it for 700 years. Yeah, you know what I mean? And that's a long, long time. So in the current day, you got people complaining about the Muslim. The people literally think that this is the first time Arabs are in Europe. They think this is the first time right now. They don't know that about during like centuries way back when. And that, let alone Islam ruled Spain and Portugal for 700 years. People really don't know that. So I say all of that to say that how do you keep Christianity of the standard if that's what you want? Because people, like, how did the Spanish Inquisition take over to get rid of that 700-year chokehold that Islam had, right? How did the Spanish Inquisition come in where, now what is the Spanish Inquisition? It was to want the exclusivity to the Catholic religion. Right. So they not only did they kill the Jews, they killed the Muslims, and later on they killed the Protestants. They wanted exclusivity to the Catholic religion, and they brought that over to Latin America, to where you see Mexicans, Dominicans, people from Argentina, people from Colombia. Their biggest religion is the Catholic religion. And when you interact with the Latinos and the Hispanics, whether they're coming into the United States or maybe you see them going somewhere else, they always bring God with them. The Latinos always win, which I think is a wonderful thing. I'm not hating or anything like that. So I say all that to say that if you want Christianity to win, listen, I have to give it to the Spaniards and I got to give it to the Latinos. And like I said, a lot of Latinos, whether they know it or not, they're mixed with Arab and Jewish, but a lot of them just don't know it.
Yeah. Well, you're right. I mean, you're right. And it goes back to what I was saying about, I don't know how relevant it is today. I just wanted to speak on that as point of fact, as far as the battle testedness and the battle readiness of Catholics over Protestants, and the importance that Martin Luther and others like John Calvin, had on pacifying Protestants, particularly as it pertained to the threat of Islam, kind of, making Catholicism the greater threat to humanity than Islam during that time. But to your point, just about the Spanish Inquisition, I'll just say a lot of people. Well, first of all, a lot of what we think of when we think of the Spanish Inquisition, a lot of it is overblown. A lot of it is a lot of what we know about the Spanish Inquisition was made popular by Protestant propaganda, but it wasn't the Spaniards. During the what they called the Reconquista, right? The reconquering of Spain. Of course, like I said, Ferdinand and Isabella dealt the final death blow, but because the Muslims had been pushed all the way to Granada, but they had I think it was one of the Alfonsos. I forget it's the Alfonso the 10th, 8th, 7th, whatever. I think he's the one. He led the Reconquista in a battle that really put the final death nail into the heart of Islam in Spain. But they were barely hanging on in Granada until Ferdinand and Isabella. Why? Because of Spanish tolerance. Again, they told the Muslims, again, the same thing when the Christians retook Jerusalem. They told the Muslims that you can continue to be Muslim just so long as you are a lawful, loyal Spanish subject. Just be a good citizen. And, they would do it out and but they had back then, Lydia, what was tantamount to what we would call terror attacks. This is what Spain had to deal with. It got so bad to the point where, because it was a trickle. It wasn't just like the Spaniards just went hog ass wild. They tried to be tolerant of Muslims, but they kept attacking them. They were random stabbings, random uprisings, and these kinds of things. And they would pledge their allegiance to Spain, but then when they got home, they were still in the mode of jihad. So that's how the Inquisition came, because a lot of Muslims would openly convert, for example, to Christianity. Because in Islam, they have this thing called taqiyya. Look it up. It's in Islam. It's the doctrine of taqiyya. And the Prophet Muhammad explicitly told his followers to, for the sake of self-preservation, lie, right? Lie about your intentions, lie about who you are until you gain the upper hand. Just so long. You can renounce Allah so long as the love for Allah is still in your heart. So it's not about what you say or what you do. It's about what you feel on the inside. So Spain, they started banning Qurans. They started telling them that they couldn't speak They couldn't speak Arabic. They had to learn Spanish and so on. And so they so ban their holy books, ban their language. They even went so far as they began to ban these holdover Muslims from carrying knives. Those who stayed after the fall of Granada, because they, again, a lot of them wanted to stay, but again, they kept up. There was these random uprisings, and so that's when they said enough is enough, and that's when the Inquisitions began. And it's funny because the Moreners, the Jews, kind of got caught in the middle, because Spain began to conflate Muslims and Jews. To your point, we talked about how they're similar and
they're related. Mm-hmm.
So they began to conflate them, and so they began to persecute Jews and Muslims. But the object of the Crusades were really the holdovers from the Umayyad dynasty or whatever else that was there in Spain, right? So we hear about the Moreners, again, a lot of them, these were Jews and on the surface, or Christians they were Jews. They converted to Christianity on the surface, forced conversion, but they practiced Judaism when no one was watching. The Muslims had this same phenomenon, but they weren't called Moreners, they were called Moriscos. So you had Moreners and you had Moriscos. Muslims Christians by day, but Muslims by night. And the Spanish, they learned the tactics of Inquisition, the Reconquista, They learned these tactics from the Moors because the Moors had done the same thing to them 800 years prior.
That's funny because we have Ethiopians like that. They're the Ethiopian Jews. They're called they're the Falashas. They're Beta
Falasha.
Israel, which is the home of Israel. But then you have the Ethiopians that you can't even, you don't even know which Ethiopians are mostly Ethiopians or which ones are Ethiopian Jews. You can't, because they forced the original Ethiopians before Christianity came there on the 4th century were pagans, and then the other half followed Judaism. So they would call them Beta Mirage or something similar to what you just said. These were Ethiopian Jews that were forced to be Christian, but behind closed doors they were still practicing Judaism, which is crazy.
Because Christianity was especially bitter and hostile to Jews for a very long time because of their refusal to get on board with the new religion. But that's a whole other conversation because, we're running out of time because we could talk about the roots of Jew hatred. First, it was theological, right? Then it, by the time of the Enlightenment or, secularism was in full swing and this kind of reinvigorated idea of the nation state by the late 1800s. And then it's when it became racial. And then now Israel as a state has become the epitome of all things evil, right? But I just want to close out before we end here because you said something about Latin America and how that shit wouldn't fly down there. Let me just say this, and he's, this idiot Candace Owens, when she got into it with Ben Shapiro, she made this comment about blessed are the peacemakers, and of course, communists would use that tagline during the America First movement back in the 1930s in order to prevent the United States from getting involved in the Second World War so as to aid Hitler's takeover of Europe, right? But this idea that Christians don't war, Christians are peaceful, that's not true. It's not even what the Bible says, not even what the Bible teaches. Because the Bible makes it clear the difference between one's private life and one's duty to the public or what one does in a public capacity. There is nothing inherently unchristian about war, right? Because there's nothing more, there's no gesture, right? More, I guess, loving and sacrificial than, of course, to lay one's life down. And that's a labor of love, is to fight and to potentially die to protect your loved ones. There's nothing more loving than that. Augustine believed that. Even I don't have time to quote scripture. I don't know if I could remember some of these scriptures off the top of my head, but there's this idea that Christianity is synonymous with passivity as some kind of ideological framework when it comes to how you view conflict is just not true. It's just not true. Sometimes, going to war and signing up to die in the defense of not just your family, but the whole idea of Christianity to maintain that life that you have, that context. When this is not stuff that Reagan talked about when it came to the Soviet Union. You have to beat back totalitarianism because of choosing Christ. You have to choose Christ. If Christianity is a choice, you have to foster a society that allows people to think freely so that they can openly and willingly make that choice. Because if you can't make the choice to follow Christ, you cannot save your soul. So that's why we have to destroy the Soviet Union. It's the same thing when it comes to this here. You have to be willing to protect. So this idea that Christians are anti-war, we don't want war, that's just communist propaganda, Last thing, Muslims have this idea, talk about martyrdom, and Christians had the toughest time because Christians don't embrace this idea of martyrdom, right? Pope Urban, I believe it was, at the Council of Claremont, said that if a crusader or if a Christian or somebody, or if you offer up your life as a Christian to take back the Holy Land, then you're guaranteed salvation. Now that may not be biblical, but that's what he said, and it worked. And so you don't have to think that dying in the war is going to save your soul. But again, standing up and defending yourself against a foreign hostile civilization, a foreign and a hostile ideology and religion is a labor of love. And I don't know if there is anything more Christian than that. How about that?
And that's why I'm saying the Latinos, they embody that. And I'm just saying that from an unbiased perspective. That's just the consistency. Just like I said that the Jews have their consistency in Judaism, I see with that with the Latinos. Like the Spaniards brought that over here to the Latin America or to the Americas, and they keep it going. They bring the Lord with them everywhere.
Battle test.
They save
Family tradition,
They
and
saved
you can't take that from them. You can't take that from them. So
800
there's a
years.
difference between Christianity dying in the United States specifically versus in the whole Americas. You have to specify. I could see Christianity being secularized or dying in the United States, but I can't see Christianity dying in Latin America. Like I said, from Mexico all the way down to Argentina, I can't see in Chile and those countries. I can't see it dying there, and that's how they maintain their Christian hegemony, and I just can't take that away from them.
We'll see. Hopefully, communism hasn't taken too much a toll on Latin America, but we'll see. But thanks for sitting down with me.
Thank you. Thanks for chopping it up. It's been wonderful. Thanks for having me. I appreciate the time. And for those who watch, thank you for watching.
Yeah.